Rain hammered the rooftops and pooled in dark, oily rivers along the gutters of Seattle's South Park district. Detective Valerie Kim braked her battered bicycle in front of a sagging, paint-peeled house. Her UW Husky's cap pulled low against the storm. The radio crackled in her ear, dispatch giving nothing but an address and the words, "Possible animal cruelty, anonymous tip, something alive inside." She hesitated on the porch, glancing at the padlocked basement door that looked out of place among the graffiti and moss. Valerie's gloved fingers hovered over the lock cutters on her belt. Something deep inside, a memory of her brother's voice, trembling behind a locked door years ago, pushed her to act quickly. Lightning illuminated the cracked windows as she jammed the cutters around the thick steel. A loud snap. The lock hit the ground. Instantly, the air below flooded upward, the stench of urine, mold, and something worse. Valerie pressed her sleeve to her nose, heart pounding, as she flicked on her flashlight and ducked into the basement. Her beam swept across broken crates and gnawed chair legs before landing on a small shape huddled in the far corner. A German shepherd, ribs sharp beneath a filthy coat, chains biting into its neck, stared at her with golden, wild eyes, both terrified and fiercely defiant. The animal's right forepaw was raw and scarred, blood crusted where it had chewed at the iron. The sight was almost more than she could stand. Valerie knelt, mind racing. Protocol screamed at her to wait for backup. But as thunder shook the house, she saw the dog's head jerk in panic. Valerie, recalling every lesson about trust, slid her coat from her shoulders, her movements slow and deliberate. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." Her voice, low and steady, seemed to reach the animal somewhere beneath its terror. She laid the coat near him and sat cross-legged, her body tense but her eyes never leaving his. The shepherd sniffed the fabric, eyes flicking up, wary but hungry for warmth. After a long minute, the dog dragged himself forward, limping, shaking, until his weight sagged into her lap. He trembled so violently she thought he might break apart, but he never looked away. Valerie felt tears sting her eyes, memories of her brother's last night echoing in the silent plea of the animal. She gently examined the shepherd, noticing a tattoo along the inner ear and the torn stub of a missing ear tag, details that didn't fit any regular rescue dog. Instinct told her this was no ordinary case. She reached for her radio. "Dispatch, I need animal control and a unit for possible illegal K9. Her words froze as the dog's head snapped up, ears rigid, hackles raised. A guttural growl rumbled from his throat. Before Valerie could react, Havoc, she'd later learn his name, lunged, not at her, but at the darkness above the basement stairs, barking with a ferocity that shook dust from the rafters. Valerie's hand went to her service weapon as heavy footsteps thudded overhead. Her mind raced. Was she walking into an ambush? The shepherd's barking turned into a warning siren, echoing up the stairwell. Suddenly, something crashed on the main floor. Valerie stiffened, feeling the chain of dread tighten around her chest. She cradled Havoc, whispering for him to stay. His body blocked her legs, refusing to let her stand, as if he could shield her with his thin body. A loud thud, boots at the door above. Valerie pulled her radio, her voice tense. "Possible hostile upstairs. Request immediate backup." As she waited, her free hand ran along the basement wall for anything useful. Her fingers brushed against something taped beneath a loose board. Cold metal tags, plastic zip drives, a paper scrap smeared with numbers. She barely had time to process before a door upstairs burst open. Shadowy figures moved, flashlights slicing through the gloom. Valerie pressed herself and Havoc into the shadows, heart hammering, her mind balancing fear and the fierce need to protect this wounded soul at her feet. In that moment, everything sharpened. The feel of the shepherd's rapid breath, the stink of the room, the faint glimmer of hope in his golden eyes. Valerie knew, whatever waited above, she wouldn't leave him behind. The memory of her brother's locked door burned in her chest, fusing her fate to Havoc's. As a shadow paused at the basement stairs, the chain holding dog and detective together grew stronger than any lock. The storm outside raged on, but Valerie was no longer just a detective. She was a shield, a lifeline, and Havoc's only hope. And as Havoc's growl rose to meet the thunder, Valerie Kim felt the unmistakable snap of her old life breaking apart. The first link in a chain neither of them could escape. Rain hammered harder against the windows, drowning out the distant sirens. Valerie's back pressed to the basement wall, her heart thudding so loud it nearly drowned out the shepherd's warning growl. She drew her service pistol, her hands steady even as adrenaline roared through her veins. Upstairs, the front door crashed inward. Two masked men in dark clothing darted through the entry, their flashlights slicing jagged arcs through the gloom. The first swept the room, barking out a guttural order in a voice so gravelly it barely sounded human. The second rifled through drawers, their movements frantic, searching for something or someone. Valerie tightened her grip, her finger poised near the trigger. Havoc wedged himself between her and the stairs, his body rigid, every muscle tensed with fear and fierce determination. The way he planted himself, head low, teeth bared, spoke volumes. He'd rather take the brunt of whatever came than let it reach her, a moment of paralysis. Valerie's mind flashed to a training exercise. How quickly things could go sideways. How you learn to listen to your instincts, not just the manual. Tonight, protocol meant nothing. Above, one of the men cursed and kicked a chair. "Where is it?" The other hissed something in return, words muffled. Then, footsteps thudded on the stairs. Valerie steadied her aim at the doorway as shadows loomed at the top. The shepherd let out a low, guttural bark that seemed to echo off every wall. A sharp beam of light stabbed into the basement. "There!" one of the men shouted. Valerie raised her badge in her left hand, keeping her gun trained on the door. "Seattle PD, step back and show me your hands." Her voice sliced through the chaos. The men froze. One bolted back up the stairs, boots hammering on wood. The other hesitated, a split second too long. Havoc's hackles rose, a low snarl rising from his chest. The man darted forward, a flash of silver in his hand. Valerie's training kicked in. "Don't move!" she shouted, advancing a step, gun steady. The masked man swore, threw a small object at her feet, a balled-up piece of paper, and retreated. Boots slamming up the steps, a door banged, then the sudden quiet of the house swallowing their retreat. For a moment, all that remained was the sound of Valerie's own breath, ragged and harsh, and Havoc's steady, protective stance between her and the darkness. She lowered her gun, chest tight. Havoc sniffed the paper. Valerie crouched to pick it up. Unfolded, it revealed 2 lines of scrawled text. "Bring the dog, or else." Below it, a hastily drawn symbol, a dog's paw print surrounded by a chain. She felt the chill seep into her bones. This wasn't just about a lost or abused animal. This was a threat, and it was personal. The shepherd whined, his body trembling. Valerie stroked his head, murmuring soft reassurances, her own hands shaking now that the danger had passed. As she cradled his scarred paw, she noticed something new. A faded number tattooed beneath the fur, and a torn edge where an ear tag had once been. These weren't ordinary marks. They hinted at something organized, systematic. Backup arrived moments later, sirens flaring, boots stomping. Officers burst through the ruined front door, weapons drawn, sweeping the rooms. Valerie called out, her voice calm despite the adrenaline's aftertaste, identifying herself and the situation. Animal Control rushed to the basement, carefully loading Havoc onto a stretcher. He resisted, panic flaring in his eyes, but Valerie knelt beside him, her presence the only anchor he seemed to trust. Detective Evans, her longtime partner, surveyed the damage. "You all right?" he asked, his gaze flicking between her and the German Shepherd. "I'm fine. The dog, he's more than just evidence. Someone's after him." Valerie held out the threatening note. Evans frowned, reading the words, and shook his head. "Looks like ex-cop work," he muttered. "There's been talk. Underground K9 trading, maybe a ring. Houses like this. Storage for broken dogs." His words hung heavy in the dank air. As officers scoured the rooms, Havoc stirred, eyes darting to a corner. Suddenly, he pulled against his leash, dragging Valerie to a patch of uneven floorboards. His nose worked furiously, paws scratching, until a board came loose. Valerie knelt, reaching beneath. Her hand closed on a bundle. Flash drives taped together, each marked with dates and police precinct codes. Alongside them, a collection of dog tags, some rusty, some polished smooth by countless hands, each etched with a number and a name. Valerie's breath caught as she read the tags aloud. Bolt, Roxy, Mace, Havoc, all missing K9S from cases that had gone unsolved. Evans's eyes widened. This is bigger than just one dog, Val." Valerie's mind raced. The tattoo, the torn tag, the dog tags. Each clue fit a puzzle she'd never known she was assembling. And Havoc, shivering by her side, was the living, breathing center of it all. She pressed the dog tags into an evidence bag, careful to photograph every detail. The flash drives, potentially a goldmine of information, she tucked into her coat's inner pocket. If someone in the department was involved, she'd need to be careful. Very careful. Outside, the rain eased, but inside Valerie's chest, the storm had only just begun. As officers packed up, Havoc refused to leave her side, his intense golden eyes never straying from her face. She met his gaze, feeling the weight of his trust and his terror. "You're safe with me," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. "I promise." But in the back of her mind, fear gnawed, a sense that this promise would demand more than she'd ever given before. She glanced once more at the threatening note, its message burning into her memory. As she walked Havoc out into the rain-slicked street, Valerie knew her life had just changed forever. She was no longer just investigating a crime. She was being hunted, and the only way out was through. Valerie Kim's apartment was a modest walk-up, tucked above a corner market in Beacon Hill, where the glow of late-night neon painted rainbows on wet pavement. For the first time in years, she hesitated at her own front door, glancing at the battered German Shepherd at her side. Havoc's thick coat, scrubbed but still patchy, glistened from the rain. She'd insisted on bringing him home instead of leaving him in the cold, impersonal holding runs at the precinct. Inside, she led Havoc through the narrow hallway, careful not to crowd him. He flinched at the soft click of the lock, muscles bunching beneath his coat, as if expecting the worst. The apartment was quiet, filled with the hum of an old fridge and the soft ticking of a clock. Ordinary sounds, but to Havoc, every new noise was a threat. The shadows seemed deeper in here, the walls closer. Valerie knelt beside him, unfastened the temporary leash, and waited. Havoc stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes flicking from corner to corner. Valerie recognized that look. She'd seen it in the mirror, years ago, after her brother was killed. The nights she'd hidden under the stairs, ears ringing with every slam of the front door. Sometimes silence was the loudest thing in the world. She spoke softly, explaining each move as she went. "I'm getting your water bowl. Just setting it here." Even that was too much. Havoc cowered at the sound of the metal bowl hitting the tile, his body pressed low to the floor. Valerie's patience was infinite in these moments. She settled cross-legged on the rug, reading case files aloud in a low, soothing murmur. Havoc stayed as far away as possible at first, curled against the far wall, always watching. She could feel the tension in the room, her own heart pounding in sync with the dog's shallow breaths. Night fell heavy and long. Rain battered the windows, and each thunderclap made Havoc tremble uncontrollably. Valerie's mind slipped back. She saw herself at 12, knees drawn to her chest in a closet, her brother's arm wrapped around her. She remembered the terror, the way her body seemed to shrink every time the world outside turned violent. A sudden noise, a siren on the street, made Havoc leap up, pacing in circles. Valerie steadied her breathing, keeping her movements slow. "It's okay, just the city. Nothing's coming for you tonight." She held out her hand, palm up. After what felt like hours, Havoc crept forward, inch by inch, muscles taut as piano wire. He stopped just short of her outstretched fingers. She felt the heat of his breath, the uncertain flicker in his golden eyes. Then a miracle. Havoc gently touched his nose to her hand, then jerked away, uncertain, but a little less afraid. Valerie didn't push. She let him have control, let the moment settle. As the days crawled by, Valerie kept her routines quiet and predictable. She never closed the doors abruptly, never raised her voice, never left Havoc alone in a room for long. She learned that he wouldn't eat unless she was in the kitchen. Sometimes, he'd stand motionless by the bowl for hours, waiting for her presence before he'd take the first bite. In those silent nights, Valerie's own wounds began to surface. She found herself staring at her brother's old compass, still tucked in her jacket pocket. She remembered the promises she'd made, to protect the helpless, to never leave anyone behind. But guilt gnawed at her. Was she rescuing Havoc, or trying to save herself from a lifetime of regret? One afternoon, Valerie spread a stack of cold case files across the floor, each one marked by missing K-9 units and unsolved disappearances. She read aloud, tracing names and photos with her finger. Havoc watched, ears pricked, and as she spoke, he inched closer, finally settling his head on her knee. The contact was electric, tiny but monumental. Valerie decided to test him, just to see. She gave a low, crisp command. "Find it, Havoc." The dog hesitated, ears flicking back, but then his training kicked in. He began to search the apartment, nose sweeping the air, movements sharp and purposeful. Within moments, he paused by the closet door, tail low but wagging hesitantly. Valerie opened the door and found, tucked in an old boot, a key she'd forgotten she'd lost. She smiled through tears. She realized then, Havoc wasn't broken. He was wounded, yes, but his spirit was intact, waiting for a reason to trust again, and somehow only her voice could reach him. Valerie's heart ached with the beauty and tragedy of it. On a rainy Thursday night, Valerie sat with Havoc on the living room floor, case files strewn around them. She read her brother's old notebook, scrawled with dreams and half-finished sentences. Havoc pressed closer, resting his scarred paw on her leg. They shared the silence, the unspoken understanding of two survivors, each bearing scars invisible to the world. Outside, the city pulsed with life, horns blaring, distant laughter, the shush of tires on wet streets. But inside Valerie's small apartment, time seemed to slow, the world shrinking to the warm circle of lamplight and the steady, healing breath of a German shepherd learning, at last, that not every closed door meant danger. For Valerie, these days were both a torment and a balm. She saw her own pain mirrored in Havoc's every flinch, every haunted glance. But she also saw hope, the slow miracle of trust rebuilt, of fear replaced by cautious comfort. And as she drifted to sleep with Havoc curled at her feet, Valerie Kim understood that healing was never fast, never easy. But sometimes, in the quiet between storms, the deepest scars began to fade. Seattle's winter night fell thick and blue outside Valerie's window. Wind pressed rain in sheets against the glass, making the apartment feel even smaller, more insular, a safe harbor and a prison at once. Valerie watched Havoc sleep fitfully, his paws twitching in dreams, his ears flicking at distant sounds. She barely slept these days herself. Every time she closed her eyes, the shadowy figures from the basement returned, or she saw her brother's face, half lit in memory, just beyond the reach of comfort. The case files haunted her, stacked in restless towers on her table. Missing K9S, cold cases. Dead ends that had started to form a rough map, sketched in heartbreak and unanswered questions. Valerie knew she was dancing too close to the edge. Her supervisor's warnings, the threat scrawled on that note. But she couldn't let go, not now, with Havoc in her care and something rotten twisting beneath the city's surface. Late one night, she slipped Havoc's collar over his head and led him out into the damp dark. He moved beside her with quiet purpose, still limping slightly, but his posture had changed. Less cowering, more alert. Less a victim, more a partner. They walked Rainier Avenue, headlights shining past in smears of yellow and white. Valerie kept a hand on her lucky compass, thumb tracing its worn brass edges, feeling for some direction, some sign she wasn't just spinning in circles, as they passed the old precinct on Martin Luther King Jr. Way, Havoc slowed, his ears flat against his skull. He whined, a low, drawn-out sound. Grief and confusion wound tight. Valerie crouched, pressing her forehead to his. "You remember this place, don't you?" she whispered. His whole body trembled in answer. That reaction haunted her all the way home. She couldn't shake the feeling she was missing something obvious. Something Havoc was trying to tell her with every step, every hesitation. Back at her apartment, Valerie sorted through the evidence again. The dog tags, the tattoo number, the flash drives. Most of the data was encrypted, useless without a password. She tried everything. Badge numbers, old precinct codes, her brother's birthday. Nothing. She began visiting shelters, speaking to other officers, poking quietly at the rumor mill. Word was, an ex-cop K9 handler had gone off the rails, started selling broken dogs to organized crime. Protection, fighting, intimidation. Several units had disappeared from precincts across King County. No one wanted to talk, but everywhere she turned, there was fear in people's eyes. Not for themselves, but for what would happen if they said the wrong thing. The pieces started to fall into place the night she sat up late, the city howling outside. Havoc, restless, paced circles by the window. She opened her laptop and plugged in one of the flash drives, flipping through hundreds of coded files. Then, suddenly, she found it. A plain text log, hidden in a folder labeled Training, coordinates, dates, names she recognized from the tags. Bolt, Roxy, Mace, Havoc. A set of coordinates repeated several times, marked with the phrase Cascade Camp, Final Evaluation. Valerie pulled up a map. It was deep in the mountains, hours from Seattle, a K-9 training camp, now long shut down after an abuse scandal. The thought of all those dogs, all those chances at redemption wasted, twisted her stomach into knots. She closed her eyes and pressed her palm to Havoc's back. "I have to see this place," she murmured. "I have to know what happened to you." But doubt gnawed at her. Was she trying to save Havoc, or absolve herself for not saving her brother? Was this about justice or penance? The questions pressed in on her, thick as the rain against the glass. Days blurred together. Valerie drove the city's back streets, following trails of old case notes and fleeting tips. Havoc grew braver by her side, but the scars in both of them ran deep. He startled at the rumble of garbage trucks, cowered from sudden movement, but trusted her voice above all else. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, she'd find him pressed against her bed, eyes open, watching the door. One evening, as she gathered her notes in the evidence bag, Havoc stiffened at the word camp. Valerie noticed and repeated it. Camp, Havoc. His ears twitched, and he let out a soft, uncertain bark. A memory flickered in his eyes, something between fear and recognition. Valerie made up her mind. She packed a bag, clothes, her brother's compass, a flashlight, a camera, the flash drives and tags. She debated who to trust. Evans had always had her back, but lately he seemed nervous, deflecting her questions, glancing over his shoulder. The note had warned her to stay away, and her supervisor's tone grew colder every time she asked for support. The force felt like a maze of mirrors, every ally a potential threat. That night, she sat with Havoc at her feet, staring out at the city's restless lights. "I don't know who's on my side anymore," she confessed, her voice so low it barely stirred the air. "But I'm not leaving this alone. I promise you that." As the clock ticked past midnight, Valerie packed the last of her things, checked her service weapon, and made one last call to Evans. No answer. Havoc watched her with those burning golden eyes, as if sensing the shift, the leap into the unknown. When she finally lay down, sleep wouldn't come. The city's footsteps echoed in her mind, every memory and regret pacing the room with her. She knew what tomorrow would bring, a journey into the mountains, into the heart of the darkness that had claimed so many lives, canine and human alike. But for tonight, it was just her and Havoc, two survivors, bound by scars, waiting for dawn and whatever footsteps would follow them into the Cascade wilds. Morning in the Cascades was always cold, the kind of chill that seeps through layers and settles in your bones. Valerie parked her car along a remote logging road, the sun barely cresting the pine-clad ridge, mist crawling low across the undergrowth. Havoc, alert but wary, sat upright in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the window. The air smelled of moss and rain, old secrets and the wild. She clipped Havoc's leash and double-checked her brother's compass, the weight of it grounding her as she stepped into the hush of the woods. A crow cawed overhead, startling Havoc for a moment, before he fell into step beside her. Valerie moved carefully, boots crunching through layers of damp needles. This place felt abandoned by time, except for the faint, unnatural lines of fencing she found half buried in brush, and the faded sign ahead. Cascade K-9 Training Camp, police only. They crossed a cracked asphalt lot, Weeds growing up through the fractures. Barracks and sheds stood empty, their windows blinded with dust, doors hanging open on broken hinges. Somewhere inside, Valerie knew, the ghosts of the past waited. She found the main lodge, forced open the door, and stepped into a world that felt frozen in the moment it was left behind. Desks littered with water-warped training logs, a board covered in old schedules and grainy Polaroids, dogs in proud poses, officers smiling stiffly beside them. But as Valerie walked deeper, the evidence of darker things surfaced. In the corner, a stack of metal crates, each still locked tight, their bars rusted with age. Havoc bristled, hackles up, pacing in circles before one shed out back. Valerie's hands shook as she pried open the padlock on the shed. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old fear. She found dog collars, dozens, hung on nails along the wall, each stamped with a name. Some she recognized from her files. Some, she realized with a twist of dread, had been marked as deceased. A battered whiteboard bore chilling notations: failed, aggressive, too soft, sell. Havoc's barking shattered the stillness. He pressed his scarred paw against a locked locker in the back. Valerie forced it open and found a shoebox full of Polaroids, before and after pictures. In the first, strong dogs, confident, bright-eyed. In the second, hollowed-out versions, eyes dull, coats patchy, bodies shrunken by neglect or abuse. She found a photo of Havoc, nearly unrecognizable, young and proud, his golden eyes burning even through the faded ink. Another image, months later, showed him thin, terrified, a ragged scar across his paw. Valerie's anger burned through her fear, the photos, the cages, the cold labels, all proof of something far bigger than one handler gone bad. She dug deeper, prying open file drawers, finding medical logs that referenced drug vials, discipline records, even receipts for unofficial transfers. Each page told a story of betrayal, dogs discarded like broken tools when they failed to meet impossible expectations. She froze when she read a name written in the margin of one transfer record: Daniel Park. The memory hit her hard. Her childhood neighbor, missing for years after being swept up in a corruption scandal. Daniel had always loved dogs, had volunteered at the local shelter. The realization that he'd been pulled into this same web of cruelty made Valerie's stomach turn. Havoc whined and nudged her, his body tense but present. Valerie squeezed his shoulder, grounding herself. "We're getting out of here, boy, I promise." She stuffed the Polaroids and files into her backpack, her mind racing. This camp wasn't just a failed experiment. It was the center of a much larger operation, one that reached into the department, the courts, and the city's criminal underworld. A sudden noise outside snapped her attention, branches cracking, footsteps on wet gravel. Valerie flattened herself against the wall, Havoc at her side. She peered out and caught a glimpse of a dark SUV moving slowly along the road, its headlights off, windows tinted. Her pulse thundered. Someone was still watching this place, protecting its secrets. When the car moved on, Valerie hurried Havoc through the barracks, collecting every scrap of evidence she could find. As she passed an office near the exit, something caught her eye. A bulletin board with a faded map of Seattle and red string connecting precincts, dog kennels, even courthouses. At the center was a symbol she'd seen before, the paw print inside a chain. She photographed everything, feeling the psychic toll of what she was uncovering. These files weren't just about animals. They were about a system that destroyed the vulnerable, that valued obedience above life, that cast aside the broken. Valerie paused outside, her hands trembling. She looked down at Havoc, who stood tall beside her, scarred but alive, and felt something shift inside her. She'd carried her brother's memory, the pain of loss and guilt, for so many years. Now she saw the same wounds in Havoc, and in every dog whose name had been scratched out and forgotten. They hiked back to the car in silence, the evidence heavy in her bag. The woods closed behind them like a secret, but Valerie no longer felt alone. As she buckled Havoc into the passenger seat, she looked him in the eye and spoke, soft but certain. "We're not running anymore. We're fighting." The drive back to Seattle was quiet, broken only by Havoc's soft breathing and the distant wail of a siren echoing through the valleys. Valerie gripped the wheel, her resolve hardening with every mile. The operation was bigger, dirtier, and far more dangerous than she'd feared. But now, with proof in hand, she had a purpose. And as the sun slipped behind the Cascades, Valerie Kim knew she was ready to face whatever darkness waited in the city. For Havoc, for Daniel, for every life marked failed and left behind. Seattle's sky was an endless steel gray, heavy with mist, when Valerie rolled back into the city. Havoc slept fitfully on the back seat, occasionally jolting awake at every jolt in the road. Valerie's mind ran faster than traffic on the viaduct, every mile replaying the images she'd found in the Cascade camp, the cages, the collars, the map with its web of red strings and names. She barely slept. She spent the next day in her apartment, windows locked, curtains drawn, organizing the evidence. Files, Polaroids, medical logs, the encrypted flash drives. Her phone buzzed again and again. Texts from Evans, "Call me when you're safe." Voicemails from her supervisor, even a blocked number that left only silence. Late that afternoon, the call came that changed everything. Captain Romero, her supervisor, summoned her to the precinct. "Leave the evidence. Just bring yourself." Something in his voice put her on edge, a stiffness she'd never heard before. Valerie left Havoc behind, locking the door tight, and biked the short, rain-slicked streets to the station. The air inside was colder than usual. Conversations hushed as she walked by. Romero's office was dim, blinds closed, his expression unreadable. He stood as she entered, closed the door behind her, and spoke low. "Kim, you need to drop the K9 case. Effective immediately. You're off the investigation. Turn over anything you've found." His eyes flickered, just for a moment, toward the hallway. Valerie's breath froze. He never called her Kim. He always called her Val. She set her jaw. "Why?" Romero's lips thinned. "Orders from above. You're not the only one who's stirred up trouble, and frankly," he hesitated, voice dropping further, "I'd watch my back. This doesn't just touch cops. It's bigger, and it's dangerous." Valerie's chest tightened. She scanned his face for some sign of the man she'd trusted, but all she found was a stone wall. She nodded, turned, and walked out, the weight of betrayal pressing at her shoulders. Back home, the sense of wrongness wouldn't leave her. Havoc paced anxiously, his ears flattening at every distant car alarm. The city outside felt suddenly predatory, as if every shadow might be watching. Valerie tried to call Evans, straight to voicemail. As night deepened, she began organizing her files to hide them. Suddenly, a noise at her door. The knob rattled. Havoc shot to his feet, hackles high, body tensed like a live wire. Valerie grabbed her gun and moved silently to the hallway, heart pounding. The door crashed open. A masked figure burst inside, moving with the precision of someone who knew this building, who wasn't afraid. Havoc launched himself forward, teeth bared, barking with wild fury. The figure tried to dodge, but Havoc caught their arm, teeth sinking deep. Valerie shouted, "Stop! Police!" But the intruder swung a crowbar, catching Havoc's flank. The shepherd yelped but refused to let go, fighting even harder. Valerie fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The figure jerked away, stumbled, and fled back through the door, leaving a spray of blood on the hallway tiles. She slammed the door shut, shaking, adrenaline leaving her hands numb. Havoc limped to her, blood staining his fur, eyes wide but alive. "Oh, Havoc." Valerie fell to her knees, pressing her hands to his wound, tears sliding down her cheeks. She patched him up as best she could. Old towels, her brother's first aid kit, trembling fingers. Havoc whimpered but stayed still, his head pressed against her arm. She realized then just how exposed she was. Her apartment, once a refuge, now felt violated. As she wrapped Havoc's flank, her phone buzzed again. An anonymous text. "The next dog won't be so lucky. Stop digging or you'll lose everything." The threat was clear. They knew where she lived, they knew she had Havoc, and they wouldn't stop. Valerie's fear hardened into fury. She looked at Havoc, still trembling, but his eyes full of trust. "No more running, partner," she whispered. "If we hide, we lose." She grabbed her bag, stuffed it with the files, the Polaroids, the flash drives, and packed Havoc's leash. Before she left, she typed up a file of what she'd found and sent it, encrypted, to a trusted friend, a local investigative reporter named Mia Rios, who owed her a favor. She included a simple message: "If anything happens to me, publish everything." Before dawn, Valerie wiped her apartment for prints, left the city-issued phone on her bed, and vanished with Havoc into the pre-dawn rain. They spent the night at a cheap motel outside Ballard, the heater buzzing, the walls thin as paper. Havoc whimpered in his sleep, jerking at every distant siren. But Valerie stayed beside him, gun within reach, waiting for the next move. Sleep was impossible. She replayed every moment with Romero, every uneasy glance from Evans, every warning she'd ignored. There was no one left to trust inside the department. Not anymore. Just before sunrise, her phone buzzed with a reply from Mia. "Meet me tomorrow, Pike Place. Don't bring your badge. And Val, be careful. They're watching." Valerie stared at the screen, heart pounding. She looked at Havoc, at the blood on his fur, at the makeshift bandage on his side. This wasn't just about a dog, or even a ring of corrupt cops. It was about survival. It was about justice. It was about fighting back, even if it cost her everything. Dawn in Seattle came with a low copper glow that did nothing to ease Valerie's nerves. She barely recognized her own reflection in the motel bathroom mirror, shadowed eyes, lips pressed thin, hair wild beneath her battered UW Huskies cap. Havoc lay curled at her feet, bandaged but alert, tracking her every move. Trust and anxiety shone equally in his golden gaze. She packed light: files, flash drives, the battered compass, a change of clothes, Havoc's favorite chew toy, what little comfort she could offer. By the time she slipped out, the motel's neon sign was blinking, the lot empty except for a couple arguing in a beat-up sedan. Valerie and Havoc faded into the city's morning bustle, blending with workers and tourists. No badge, no uniform, just another face in the crowd. Valerie moved with purpose, but her senses stretched thin, eyes flicking over shoulders, noting every unfamiliar car, every set of footsteps that seemed to linger. Havoc's head stayed low, tail tight, but his nose was busy, reading the city's tension. The plan was clear: meet Mia Rios at Pike Place, hand over everything, and trust her to do what the department would not. She reached the market just before 10. The air was heavy with salt, coffee, and the brine of crushed flowers. Tourists packed the alleys, making it hard to see or be seen. Perfect if you needed to disappear. Valerie spotted Mia by the fish stand, camera bag slung over her shoulder, phone pressed to her ear. She gave a small nod as Valerie approached. They moved to a quieter spot by a row of produce stalls. "You bring it?" Mia's voice was soft but urgent. Valerie handed over the thumb drives, a folder of Polaroids, a crumpled page of names and dates. "It's all there. Training logs, lists, evidence of who's in on it. Don't trust anyone in the department. Not even Evans. Not anymore." Mia's mouth tightened. "You're sure about this?" A small smile, thin as thread. "I don't have a choice. If they find me, it's over." Havoc pressed against Valerie's leg, his body tense, ears pricked. Suddenly, the mood of the market shifted. A sharp cry, a toppled crate, people scattering. Instinct screamed at Valerie. She yanked Mia back just as gunfire cracked above the crowd. Chaos erupted. Vendors ducked, shoppers screamed, and the shooter, hidden behind sunglasses and a ball cap, emerged from behind a fruit stall, aiming right at them. "Get down!" Valerie shouted, dragging Mia behind a stack of crates. Havoc lunged at a nearby child, knocking the girl to the ground as bullets sprayed overhead. Valerie scrambled to shield them both, heart pounding, hand groping for her service weapon. Gone, left behind with her badge. All she had was Havoc, her wits, and a desperate urge to protect. A bullet splintered the wood inches from her head. Shoppers trampled past, stumbling over boxes and each other, screams filling the air. Havoc stood over the child, barking fiercely, refusing to move even as bullets flew. Valerie grabbed the girl, hauling her behind a thick steel dumpster just as another shot ricocheted off the pavement. Mia, breathless, clutched the evidence to her chest. "They're here for you." "No, they're here for this." Valerie jerked her chin at the folder. "Run for the news van. Go, I'll cover you." Mia hesitated, then darted through the chaos. The shooter, realizing his target was slipping away, turned, but Havoc barreled into his legs, knocking him off balance. Valerie seized the moment, hurling a crate at the man's face, then sprinting with Havoc through the warren of alleyways behind the market. Sirens wailed, drawing closer. The shooter disappeared into the crowd as fast as he'd arrived. Valerie ducked into a stairwell, breathing hard, clutching Havoc's collar as they pressed into the city's underground. Old maintenance tunnels, dripping and cold. Havoc shivered but kept moving, nose to the ground, paws splashing through shallow water. They emerged blocks away, breathless, dirty, alive. Above them, Seattle's skyline shimmered in the sun, indifferent to the chaos below. Valerie's phone buzzed, a burner, registered to no one. A text from Mia. "Evidence delivered. FBI on it. Don't go home. Stay moving. We'll update soon." Relief mingled with dread. Valerie knew the story would break within hours. Her face and Havoc's would be all over the news. Cop on the run, whistleblower, wanted by enemies on both sides. She moved through the city's back streets, always watching, always wary. A kind old woman in a thrift store let her and Havoc rest in a storeroom for a few hours, giving Havoc water and a torn blanket. "Looks like he's been through hell," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "You too, honey." "Yeah," Valerie said, the word barely a whisper. "But we're not done yet." As night fell, Valerie found herself at the edge of the water, watching ferries slide through Elliott Bay. Havoc stood beside her, scarred paw resting on her shoe, eyes bright in the dusk. She stroked his head, feeling the fierce, unbreakable bond they'd built, one forged in trauma and trust. She knew they weren't safe, not yet, But with the evidence delivered, the truth set loose, and the city waking up to the depth of the corruption, she felt hope for the first time in weeks. The story was out. The chase had begun. In the distance, sirens wailed, and Valerie Kim, fugitive detective, held Havoc close and prepared for whatever tomorrow would bring. Night closed over Seattle like a shroud, thick with fog and rumor. Valerie guided Havoc through alleys and shadowed parks, keeping off main streets, her heart pounding at every set of headlights, every drifting voice. She didn't trust the city, not now, not after betrayal, not with the hunt closing in. By midnight, she reached Alki Point, the waves crashing dark and cold beneath the old bluff. Here, an abandoned house, once belonging to a retired judge, now barely standing, waited like a secret. Inside, the air tasted of dust and old salt. Mia was already there, huddled near a boarded-up window with her camera and a battered laptop. "You made it," she breathed, relief flickering in her eyes. Valerie collapsed beside her, Havoc standing guard, still limping, but sharper than ever. "Any word from the FBI?" Valerie whispered. "They're coming," Mia said, voice shaking. "But it could be hours. The story broke. Every paper, every channel. People are angry, Val. But whoever's running this ring, they're desperate. There's chatter about tying up loose ends." Loose ends. Valerie looked at Havoc, at the trust shining in his battered face, and felt a cold certainty. "We're the last thread," she murmured. Outside, headlights flashed. A black SUV rolled slow down the block. Another parked at the corner. Valerie's instincts screamed, "Ambush." She motioned for Mia to move, gathering her evidence and the trembling reporter. Havoc bristled, hackles rising. Footsteps, 3, maybe 4 men, approached from the alley, the hush of their voices lost beneath the pounding surf. They were trapped. Valerie pressed her back to the wall, gun drawn. "Mia, get the kids and dogs to the crawl space. You remember the way?" Mia nodded, already gathering the others. 2 frightened children, and 3 other rescued dogs, all saved from the K9 ring's last operation, their eyes wide, haunted. Havoc, bloodied but proud, limped to the front of the group, nosing the crawl space panel loose. The front door splintered. Smoke grenades rolled across the floor. Valerie's eyes stung. She coughed, blinking away tears. Shadows rushed in, flashlights slicing through the haze. Havoc let out a warning bark, rallying the other dogs, then darted into the crawl space, leading the group through the dark, twisting passage beneath the house. Valerie covered their retreat, firing 2 shots into the air, enough to slow the men, but not enough to hit. She ducked as a bullet cracked into the molding above her head. "Keep moving!" she yelled. In the tight, suffocating crawl space, the group moved blindly. Valerie's only guide was Havoc's sharp yip and the soft scuffle of paws and sneakers. Mia sobbed quietly, whispering to the children, urging them to stay low. The walls felt like they were closing in. Behind them, the attackers set the house alight. Flames licked along the baseboards, smoke curling through cracks. Valerie's lungs burned. "Almost there," she said, reaching for the trap door she'd noticed earlier during her first sweep. It stuck, swollen with age and damp. Havoc scratched furiously, whining, a frantic urgency in his movements. With a final shove, Valerie wrenched the door open. Cold night air flooded in. One by one, she helped the children and the dogs out into the wild, windswept yard behind the house. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer, red and blue lights reflecting in puddles on the blacktop. But the threat wasn't over. 2 men rounded the house, guns raised. Valerie shielded the children with her body, heart thundering. Before the men could fire, Havoc lunged. Injured, but fearless, he tackled one, knocking his weapon away. The other turned on Valerie. Time slowed. She fired, one shot clean, knocking the gun from his hand. The men fled as FBI agents finally swarmed the scene, floodlights burning through the fog. Mia screamed for help, waving her arms, the kids clinging to her legs. The dogs, battered and terrified, clustered around Havoc, their leader, their survivor. Valerie staggered to the porch, gun lowering at last, the adrenaline drain making her legs tremble. An agent rushed to her side, shouting orders into a radio. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, barely breathing. "Get them to safety. Get all of them out." Within minutes, the FBI swept through the burning house, arresting the attackers, gathering evidence. Paramedics checked the children and the dogs, wrapping them in blankets, murmuring quiet reassurances. Havoc refused to leave Valerie's side, his scarred paw bleeding again, but his eyes clear, proud. A commotion near the aid tent caught Valerie's attention. One of the agents led a female German shepherd out of the smoke, a dog as battered and haunted as Havoc, but alive. "We found her in a cage. Must be his sister," the agent said. Valerie knelt, arms open. Havoc limped forward, touching noses with the other dog, a quiet, painful reunion. The other dogs gathered close, forming a trembling, hopeful circle. Mia squeezed Valerie's arm. "You did it," she said, voice thick with tears. "You saved them." Valerie shook her head. Not alone, not ever alone. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a long, shaking breath. The house burned behind them, evidence of evil but also of survival. The K9 ring was shattered, its leaders in cuffs, its survivors free. The city would never be the same. Neither would she. As dawn broke, Valerie Kim stood with Havoc and the others beneath the washed-out sky, battered but unbroken, the scars on their bodies and souls now badges of survival, of hope. Weeks passed. Seattle slipped from winter's grip, the days stretching longer and warmer. In the city's quieter corners, dog parks and playgrounds, libraries, even the old precinct, people whispered about the scandal that had finally broken. The news ran stories for days. K9 ring shattered, dirty cops indicted, a wounded detective, and her loyal German shepherd at the center of it all. For Valerie, though, the headlines felt distant. Life had shrunk to the slow rhythms of healing. Valerie spent her days volunteering at the Rainier Valley Animal Shelter, the same place she'd brought Havoc after the safe house fire. The shelter overflowed with dogs, some XK9S rescued from the ring, some surrendered by families who'd lost trust in the system. Havoc became a fixture, patting the halls with his scarred paw, tail wagging at the smallest kindness, quick to rest his head on the knees of children who came to read to the animals. Still, not everything healed with sunlight and time. Valerie noticed how Havoc startled at the sound of keys turning in a lock, or the click of a heavy door. Closed spaces made his breath go shallow, his body flattened to the floor. She understood that panic in her bones. At night, she still woke to the echo of boots in hallways, of threats muttered in the dark, her brother's memory close as breath. One rainy afternoon, Valerie sat by the shelter window, her brother's battered notebook open on her lap. She ran her thumb over his writing, hopeful, messy, filled with big dreams and promises he'd never get to keep. On a blank page, she wrote, "Being locked away isn't just about bars. Sometimes it's what we carry inside." The act of writing, putting pain into words, felt like a release. She remembered Havoc, trembling in that dark basement, refusing to look away. She remembered the moment he chose trust over fear, inching into her lap, believing in something better. That small, stubborn act had changed everything. It reminded her that survival was more than escape. It was about connection, about the courage to reach out, to fight for someone else, even when you were still bleeding inside. Her work at the shelter was a quiet revolution. More people came each week, asking about adoption, about ways to help. Kids made hero cards for Havoc and the other rescued dogs, taping them to the shelter wall. Local volunteers formed a task force to support K9 reform and oversight, petitioning city council for new rules and protections. Valerie met families who'd lost faith in the system, watched them slowly return, moved by the story of a broken dog who'd become a survivor. Havoc's recovery was slow and uneven, but every small victory felt enormous. The day he entered a room with a closed door and didn't panic, Valerie blinked back tears. When he let a nervous child pet his scarred paw without flinching, she realized how much strength looked like gentleness. The community, once wary, now opened its arms. People brought toys, blankets, bags of food, and even therapy dogs to play and model calmness for the XK9S. Valerie, too, found herself changing. For years, she'd lived with anger and guilt, convinced she'd never done enough for her brother, for the victims she couldn't save. Now, as she watched Havoc and his sister, both learning to play again in the muddy shelter yard, she felt those old chains begin to break. She let herself laugh, let herself rest, even let herself cry in public. Every day was a chance to practice forgiveness, for herself and for others. She saw clearly now what the whole ordeal had taught her. True justice was never about vengeance or punishment. It was about standing up for those who couldn't speak, about risking comfort and safety to do what was right. In her brother's memory, and in the wounds she shared with Havoc, Valerie saw that the bravest rescue of all was freeing yourself from the prisons of fear, shame, and loneliness. Seattle changed too. Pressure from the public and the media forced the police department to open old case files, to admit mistakes, to create independent oversight for K9 units. People who'd been afraid to speak before now came forward with their own stories, sparking a movement that swept through neighborhoods, city council meetings, and even the state legislature. The city learned that courage wasn't just about chasing suspects. It was about protecting the vulnerable, even when the enemy wore a familiar badge. On her last day at the shelter before returning to work, Valerie gathered the staff and the community volunteers together. She thanked them for their strength, for believing in Havoc and every broken soul who'd passed through those doors. In the hush that followed, she read a passage from her brother's notebook, a promise to always fight for the voiceless, to keep doors open, to never let fear win. Children clustered around Havoc, stroking his coat, taping another hero drawing to his kennel. Valerie smiled, her heart full, the shelter echoing with laughter and hope. As she left, she glanced back and saw Havoc watching her, eyes clear, posture proud. For the first time since she'd rescued him, the look in his eyes wasn't haunted. It was grateful, steady, alive. Valerie Kim stepped out into the soft Seattle rain, feeling the weight inside her finally lift. The battle wasn't over, but she knew now, with enough courage, enough kindness, even the deepest wounds could heal. The locked rooms, inside and out, could finally, mercifully, open. A clear spring morning. Seattle's sky opened wide, the first blue in weeks, sunshine glinting off the Fremont Bridge as a crowd gathered along the railings. Reporters, city officials, school children, families. Everyone wanted to witness something good for once. Valerie Kim stood off to the side, hands tucked in her jacket pockets. Havoc sitting at her heel. His coat was glossy in the sunlight, the pink scar on his forepaw like a badge of honor rather than a mark of suffering. A gentle breeze ruffled his fur as he scanned the crowd with bright, intelligent eyes. Valerie felt the old nerves creep up. So much attention, so much expectation. But she stood tall, wearing her brother's battered compass on a chain around her neck. For the first time, she felt its weight as a comfort, not a reminder of loss. At the center of the bridge, the mayor spoke into a bank of microphones, her voice warm and proud. Today, we honor Detective Valerie Kim and K9 Havoc, whose bravery exposed corruption and saved countless lives. They reminded us that justice is never about silence. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Applause swept the bridge. Valerie glanced down at Havoc, who seemed bemused by all the fuss, ears flicking at the sound of children giggling nearby. A city official knelt to hang a medal around Havoc's neck, then offered a second, smaller, silver, to Valerie. She accepted it with a quiet, stunned gratitude. But what mattered most wasn't the medals, or the cheers, or even the camera flashes. It was what happened next. A swarm of children pressed forward, eager to meet the hero dog. Some were shy at first, uncertain around such a large animal, but Havoc sat calm and patient, tail thumping softly, lowering his head to be petted. Even the bravest children pointed at his scar, asking questions in awed, hushed voices. Valerie knelt, letting them touch the battered compass around her neck. "This belonged to my brother," she told them. "He always believed in finding your way, even when you're scared. Havoc taught me that too. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, but you never give up on hope." Parents listened, faces soft with relief. Teachers snapped photos. Even the city's toughest reporters looked misty-eyed as they scribbled notes. Later, after the ceremony, Valerie and Havoc walked the edge of Lake Union, the medal catching light as it swung from his collar. They paused on a quiet bench, the city humming all around. Valerie watched ducks glide through the water, children's laughter carrying across the surface, and felt, for the first time in years, at peace. Mia Rios joined her, a coffee in each hand. "You know, Val," she said, "the reforms are real. The city council voted through everything. New oversight, new training for K9S, funding for rescue partnerships. The governor even cited your case in a speech about rebuilding trust. People are listening." Valerie nodded, tears prickling her eyes. "It's not just about one dog, Mia, or one detective. It's about everyone who's ever felt trapped, who's ever been written off or locked away. Havoc proved that hope is worth fighting for, even if it takes everything you've got." They sat together for a while, not talking, just watching the city breathe. In the weeks that followed, Havoc became a legend, a mascot for a new era. His story traveled from classrooms to city council chambers, from news stories to social media feeds. Children drew pictures of him, always proud, always brave, the scar on his paw never hidden. People who'd been afraid to speak up before now found their voices, sharing their own stories of rescue, survival, and second chances. The shelter where Havoc first learned to trust again expanded, funded by donations and city grants. More K9S found homes, more people adopted older dogs, and therapy programs grew across the state. Valerie visited often, sometimes with Mia, sometimes alone. She spoke to groups about courage and compassion, about the hard work of healing. She always ended the same way: "Don't give up. No one is ever too broken to matter." At home, Valerie built a new life with Havoc and his sister. The quiet rhythm of days filled with walks, laughter, and the messy beauty of recovery. On weekends, they returned to the bridge, where kids still gathered to tell stories and watch boats pass below. One afternoon, an older man approached, tears in his eyes. He handed Valerie a small collar tag, bent and tarnished, stamped with the name Ranger, his old K-9 partner, lost years before. "Thank you," he whispered, "for making things right, for all of us." Valerie pressed the tag into his palm, the two sharing a moment of silent understanding. On the anniversary of the bridge ceremony, Valerie stood again at the railing, Havoc at her side, the crowd around them smaller, but no less meaningful. She watched as a young girl, her arm in a cast, knelt to hug Havoc. "You're my hero," the girl said softly. Havoc leaned into her, his scars nothing but proof of survival. Valerie looked out over the city, sunshine glittering, ferries gliding, laughter rolling on the wind. Her brother's compass rested warm against her heart. She knew loss would always be part of her, but now so was hope. She'd learned, finally, that the greatest rescue wasn't pulling someone from a locked room. It was helping them find a way to live outside of it, unafraid. That day, as they left the bridge behind, Valerie whispered to Havoc, "We made it, partner. We're free." And in the story that swept Seattle, told in classrooms, at kitchen tables, and around shelter kennels, people remembered, every life matters, every voice counts, and hope, once set loose, can change the world.